All right, listen. Wojo did a really nice topic last night. And in the midst of doing the topic, he called it... Yes, Bobby. He did a nice job because it was called Mount Bustmore. And he talked about the top 5 busts in Lions draft history. And then I was entertained. Actually, it was very nice. He didn't open up talking about chocolates or dead animals or any other nonsense he normally does. He opened up with real stuff. It was good.
Well.
So last night, Tigers with the day off, little NBA playoff action. And what did ESPN have on? Oh, you know it. It happens to you guys too, 30 for 30. It's on. You end up making that a part of the rotation. Well, last night they had the 1983 draft, which was the Elway Marino 30 for 30. I think it's one of the 10 best they've ever done. It's fantastic. And maybe it's because Wojo did the topic he did, but something really jumped out at me, and I started really thinking about this. So Wojo did the top 5. And the person that wasn't talked about by Wojo, to me, could be and should be number 1. Now, look, think this over, the context of this. And Gator is right when I talk to him in Crosswalk. He is correct in that, look, Reggie Rogers played like 2 games. The guy the Lions selected in the 83 draft did play. He had some function. But when you take the player who plays that position at that point in the draft and you pass up Jim Kelly and Dan Marino and you needed a quarterback, I want to know, I mean, obviously, this is a tough one. We could get hung up on words. You could call it the worst draft pick in Lions history, but maybe you don't think it's a bust. I term bad draft picks as busts. When you make a horrific pick, it's a bust. So let me lay this out for you. I'm asking you what's the biggest bust in Lions draft history. And I know you'll bring up some of the names Bob did. But Woj didn't go down this path, and it's almost like a forgotten Lions bust. So the 83 draft rolls around. And for the old heads that are out there, you know, you were dealing with the Eric Hipple, Gary Danielson two-headed monster. And neither guy was any good. And I asked Doug and Scott just now, look, if you were on the air in the spring of 83, you would have been doing shows leading up to the draft saying we need a quarterback. Gary Danielson had been with the team for the better part of a decade and was well into his 30s. Hipple was a 4th-round pick who had been there a few years and hit or miss. You didn't have a QB. 1983 was the year of the QB. If you go back in the history books, everybody was hot for a QB because the 84 draft was supposed to not have a single first-round pick QB. Boomer Esiason was the best quarterback, and he was thought to be a second-round pick. So you're going into the draft, you need a QB. You're going into the draft that is arguably the greatest draft in history for quarterbacks ever. There was going to be a quarterback going number 1 in John Elway. There was going to be another quarterback going around the top 10 in Dan Marino and Jim Kelly. And there was going to be another couple of QBs going later on in the round with people like Todd Blackledge and Ken O'Brien. You had QBs. The Lions enter the draft picking 10th. What do the Lions do with every quarterback not named Elway still on the board? They draft a fullback out of Florida, James Jones. Repeat that to yourself if you're younger like me. For the people that are out there who are old enough to have lived that, take me back to that moment. Take me back to whether anybody was defending, hey, we just drafted a guy to block for Billy Sibbs. You drafted a fullback, 10th overall, with Jim Kelly on the board, with Dan Marino on the board. And back then, nobody envisioned Blackledge or Kenny O'Brien not quite working out. Kenny O'Brien was okay. Blackledge was a bust. My point is, shouldn't that be the biggest bust in Lions history? You passed up 2 Hall of Fame QBs that were totally justifiable at that draft spot because you had Gary Danielson and Eric Hipple Neither guy was any good. Neither guy could wrestle the starting job full time. Neither guy was a rookie or second-year player. And Hipple was a fourth-round pick. Who cares? Back in time, Dan Marino was thought to be a number one pick. Now, his senior season, as ESPN outlined, wasn't great. There were still plenty of people who wanted to take him. There were rumors of drugs and different things, all of which was unfounded. It was a smear job on Marino. Jim Kelly, yeah, he ended up in the USFL. He didn't want to play for Buffalo. Buffalo was the one destination he absolutely didn't want to play, that in Minnesota. Here's the difference. You played inside. Kelly even referenced, hey, playing indoors, the way I play, that could work. You passed up those two to take a fullback at number 10 overall. Wojo didn't bring it up. It didn't make his list of the top 5. James Jones was here for 5 years. Ended up being your running back 1 year after Billy got hurt. And then you traded him when you drafted Barry Sanders. That, to me, should be the number one bust in the history of the organization because of what you passed up. Jim Kelly, Hall of Fame. Dan Marino, Hall of Fame, and thought to be, in some people's minds, the greatest or second greatest pure quarterback in the history of football. I want to know what the biggest bust is and why James Jones doesn't get more, quote-unquote, love in this category. 248-539-9797. If you have a different selection, that's fine. But I'm fascinated by it. The year at a quarterback, you need a quarterback. Marino falls to you. Kelly's right there. You took a fullback because you had Danielson and Hipple.
Jeez, oh man.
How is that? To me, that's the biggest bust in Lions history.